mobile and small and medium businesses advertising. And I remember we had a dentist on stage, and he was a dentist who used Pandora to advertise, and it was a killer for him. It really worked brilliantly, and he loved the fact that people would stop him on the street and say to him, you know, I heard you on my Pandora. But one of the things that he said on stage that was so revealing, I don't know, it had tremendous impact on me, is he said, he was looking at an audience of other marketers, larger firms, a lot of the ones that we heard from today, who have often millions of dollars to throw at technology to succeed or fail and try. But he said, you know, the difference between me and you is that when I spend a penny on marketing, that's a penny that actually comes out of my weekly salary. That's the way he thinks differently about budgeting, about making decisions about technology, is that the more he puts into either advertising or marketing, all of that is actually coming out of the money he brings home. And that's so true on different scales and different levels for small and medium businesses of all kinds. So it's a different mindset, and it's a different way of coming at technology. It's a different set of challenges, perhaps, from all the ones that we've been hearing already today, often from much larger companies or agencies working with obviously much larger clients. So the small and medium business challenge it's an enormous market, but it's often one that doesn't get paid close enough attention to, and that's one of the things that we want to bring to bear here with one of the experts in that space, Rick Ducey, who is the managing director of BIA Kelsey, one of the companies that has been spending many years analyzing and looking at where local marketing and advertising spending goes. Rick has been an analyst in this space for 20 to 30 years. He has worked at and with companies like Microsoft, Google, and Michelin. Please welcome our old friend, Rick Ducey.
All right, thank you very much. Great to be here, and my dentist also does Pandora. Whose dentist does Pandora? I must teach that in dental school or something, I don't know. Anyway, it's really nice to be here. Thank you for letting me share some of our material here. So just a quick thing, Steve did a great job kind of profiling what company where I am, BIA Kelsey, but just quickly, we focus on things local. So that ranges from local publishers, local businesses, and then these days, location, beacons, lat long and mobile phones, things like that. So any marketing or advertising campaign that focuses on reaching a local audience from various definitions these days of local, either physically local publishers all the way to wherever the person is, we're gonna find you and put some localness around. And we look at advertising, marketing, all the different ad platforms, and particularly we skew towards digital and look at the hot spaces now, mobile search, social and video. But one thing I want to talk about today that Steve was talking about when he was introducing me is what's going on with these small and medium businesses. So my goal is to shed a little bit of light about what's going on in there. It's pretty interesting. The numbers may be impressive if you're not aware of some of these things. So I'm going to talk about generally what that part of the economy is like, the small and medium business from the context of advertising and marketing. And then I want to share one of our study series. We do surveys of these small and medium businesses, which are defined a million different ways. For our purposes, we call them businesses that have less than 100 employees. So what are they doing in terms of advertising and marketing, and actually control and aggregate a lot of money? And those small and medium businesses are small and medium, but they get oftentimes connected to major brands, franchisees, licensees. So it really interacts a lot with kind of national level things that may be more familiar to think about. So we call it the Local Commerce Monitor. It's a survey of these local businesses. So given today's content focus, I want to talk a little bit about the MarTech landscape. I know that's been a focus the whole day. Hopefully I'll add some shades of nuance or look at things a little bit differently that will make it interesting. Again, I want to come back and talk about how SMB, small and medium businesses, are a big part of the ad economy, not just the overall economy. And then just from the sessions, I wasn't able to join for the whole day, but the conversation is definitely skewing to what does it mean, advertising and marketing, content marketing, what are we able to do? What are we trying to do? And then mapping strategy to the technology to yield execution, I think is really what we're up to, and we're going about that in slightly different ways. So Beyond Advertising is anybody seen the book that just came out, Beyond Advertising, from Wharton, Future of Advertising program? It's kind of cool. So I'll highlight some of the things there very briefly. And then what's happening, the end result of all of this, is SMBs are a big part of the ad economy. This trend of moving beyond advertising, and we can use different tag terms to describe that. But as we disrupt this part of the economy, it's pretty big for advertising and marketing. As the SMBs get disrupted, that in turn will disrupt what we do in advertising and marketing going forward. So that's the sandbox I want to talk about for a little bit. Some kind of interesting things happening in here. So MarTech starts with knowing who your customer is. This guy, Travis Wright, if you've never heard him speak, he's really smart. He's like a VC technology entrepreneur, very opinionated, smart and hilarious. But so he speaks at a couple of different events. But he says, okay, it starts with knowing who your customer is. And his point when he looks at marketing technology is it really all the different tech stacks that you may look at. It basically comes down to, see if I have this. Yes, your CRM, your customer relationship management system. That's kind of the foundational structure you need to connect with your customer, know who you are. And then there's a whole bunch of other pieces of software and technology and data things you can do, and algorithms and business process rules and things like that you can add to the mix. Lots of tech stacks to MarTech, but basically data. And data can start with a CRM system. So once you get kind of the basic CRM, the rest of the marketing technology landscape becomes immediately transparently clear. You can figure out exactly what's going on. So you may have seen this Lumascape type chart. It's put together by Scott Brinker, who is a blogger. I fondly refer to him as a patron saint of MarTech. He has his own software company, but for the past several years, he's been tracking who's who in MarTech. So this is not a Lumascape, but he acknowledges that kind of thing. You're not meant to be able to read this, but you can find it online at Chief MarTech if you like. Basically, there's a ton of companies, almost 4,000 companies now that he tracks that have something to do with MarTech, and what they do. They fit into the MarTech quote-unquote stack somehow. So there's a ton happening in this space, marketing technology. And basically the job of marketing technology is to connect brands to their consumers more powerfully and more consistently. SMBs, and this is, I'm going to flip terms around a little bit now to how the US government talks about small and medium businesses. And I think they probably have 5 or 6 different definitions. It's by full-time employees, it's by revenue, it differs by the industry classification, but basically they're smallish, whatever that means, sub 1 billion, sub 500 million. The SMBs we look at, the average spend overall is for advertising is something like $2,500 a year. What we call the plus spenders, those spend at least 25 grand a year, spend maybe $80,000 a year. So when we look at SMBs from the view of some of the numbers I'll show here, it's really sort of the very small businesses. But from the government perspective, it's a long tail. There's a lot of these kind of businesses that make it interesting. There's about 28 million small and medium businesses in the US, and that's a big number. But if you distill it down to small and medium businesses that have at least 1 employee, we drop down to somewhere between 6 and 8 million companies. But still there's a ton of them. In the aggregate, over half of all US sales come through this channel, small and medium businesses, and over half of jobs currently, and 2/3 of net new jobs come from this part of the economy. So it's an important part of the economy. And the thing I mentioned before, these small and medium businesses, they're not just necessarily mom and pop shops. Oftentimes they're connected to national brands. So 600,000 plus of these small and medium businesses are franchise businesses, and that again accounts for a lot of retail sales, 40% of the retail sales. So my point here is this may be not a part of the economy, the ad and marketing economy, or just a general economy that you focus on a lot, but some stuff's cooking in this part of the economy that is going to have kind of outsized consequences when you look at it through the lens of an individual business, relatively small. But in the aggregate, there's a lot of these businesses and they have a lot of power economically, generally in the economy, and then specifically in advertising and marketing economy. So maybe it makes sense to look under the hood and see what's going on there. We do advertising forecasting, and our ad forecast, we define ad spend targeting somehow local audiences. So that could be state level targeting, it could be DMA targeting, it could be geofencing targeting, it could be beacon targeting, all different kinds of targeting. Any kind of ad spend that has a local tag to it, we track. So overall, we see advertising spending targeting local audiences growing. The bars here, the green bar, that's national advertisers. So national brands targeting local audiences, they're not just doing national campaigns anymore. Increasingly, they're spending money targeting local audiences. We see that part of the ad economy growing from 56 and change $billion in 2015 to $73.4 billion in 2020. So national brands targeting local audiences, big thing. The other big growth area is growing over $10 billion, so the blue bars, that's these small and medium businesses. So in the aggregate, these businesses are going to be spending $61 billion by 2020, and they're going to grow their spend in advertising, paid media advertising, by over $10 billion in this time frame. So again, another snapshot of kind of what's going on here just in terms of the magnitude of things. So MarTech is moving the needle for SMBs. I had to have a slide that said that since that was the title of my talk. The tech platforms and the solutions that used to be enterprise-sized, Salesforce, HubSpot, those kind of things, Marketo, are moving to become more accessible in terms of both the interfaces and the pricing options for some of these companies. So tech platforms that used to be Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 companies, now mom and pop pizza shops can run that kind of marketing power that used to be available to only companies that had CIOs and tech departments. And again, it's about the data. That was the previous panel, good. People in the MarTech, it's really the data we're trying to figure out how to connect the brand to the customer in a more powerful way. The MarTech solutions are bringing the customer data and various kinds of data full bore into the marketing mix to do what? And it's really to work that customer relationship. And it's to have a couple of, I hope, interesting factoids to share that in a moment. So it's the data to bridge the brand to the customer through these MarTech platforms in powerful and scalable ways. What's been the effect of these technologies on small and medium businesses, and what are SMBs doing about the now availability of these interesting marketing technology solutions? So this is a number you probably heard from Gartner's Laura McClellan. Anybody ever heard this number, that by 2017, the CMO tech budget is going to be bigger than the CIO tech budget? So that was based on 2011 research, and arguably we've reached that moment now where the CMO tech budget is bigger than the CIO budget. And this week with the new fronts, there's been some kind of thoughts and stories going around. A couple of studies say, no, it's not true, that the CIO still owns more of the tech budget than the CMO, is more or less being spent on advertising versus marketing. But it's good, we're having that discussion. I mean, things are changing and we're aware of it. So her point is basically, yeah, I mean, all this marketing technology, the CIO doesn't know what it means, and the CMO understands what the strategy is behind that technology, so it moves over to the CMO budget. So she argued that in 2011, and it's probably coming true. Her study is of, Gartner's study is of big businesses, not the small and medium businesses I'm focusing mostly on, but these businesses now have someone who's a chief marketing technology person. CMO is a marketing person, not necessarily a tech person. You really need to have somebody that understands both. Really, does that occur in one person? But those people have been self-inventing themselves or trained, so now we have a chief marketing technology. Anybody have a chief marketing technology person, friend that has that title or something like that? It's not always the title, but that role clearly gets played. And the marketing budgets, how are they being spent? Digital commerce, innovation of marketing, converting leads to sales, and customer retention. So recruitment, retention, loyalty programs, things like that. And this is the thing that's sort of in the trade press this week. I saw that companies are reducing their sales budgets to put more into marketing. So the SMB space we look at, we've been watching that over the past several years. How much of your combined marketing, promotion, advertising budget gets spent in paid media versus other kinds of marketing and promotion? And it's been shifting, and a couple of years ago it crossed over. So this part of the economy, these SMBs spend more in marketing, more in non-paid media than they do in paid media advertising. And that's probably going to increase even more. Some of that is a reflection, and actually shifting into digital media, which tends to be a little bit less expensive, but they're also spending more on the marketing technology side, which is sort of interesting. So Gartner's latest survey shows that CMO budgets are increasing, and the distinctions between digital marketing and marketing are vanishing. The kind of common thing these days is if you have a digital marketing plan, then you don't have a marketing plan. Your marketing plan has to inherently include digital. You can't really have two different marketing plans. So that's been the practice, and the tech kind of supports this. So I said that this power of this technology platforms, marketing technology platforms, are available to SMBs. Salesforce, HubSpot, companies like that we know about. So there's an article recently in this Marketing Land, one of these trade publications that services as part of the marketplace. So just doing a little bit of research. What's out there for small and medium businesses that basically have nothing to spend on technology? And like Steve was saying, if I spend $1 somewhere else, that's $1 out of my paycheck. So there's a bunch of companies, at least a dozen, that are available to these SMBs that do marketing technology solutions ranging from free to less than $100. You can spend as much as you want on marketing technology, but you can get a bunch of companies. Some of these are freemium, some of these are actually free, and it's ad supported. But there's a growing little ecosystem of those 4,000 marketing technology companies. There's a relatively interesting number that are designed just to service SMBs and help them make better decisions with their customers, their data, to embrace that customer experience. Here's my buddy, Scott Brinker. He wrote a book that just came out recently called Hacking Marketing. And the thing that these days is marketing is a software problem. If you're in marketing, you need to work with software, you need to work with technology. And Scott is a software engineer. If you want to have a different viewpoint of what it means to be in marketing now, his thing, hacking marketing, and hacking he uses in the positive way of what hacking meant, not the negative way. But basically, you need to use technology, and if you run marketing projects, like software engineers run software projects using agile methodology. Anybody ever practiced or heard about the Agile Marketing Manifesto? So that's, his book. If you know that stuff, that's basically what his book about, and it's a quick read. If you don't know it, it's sort of interesting. Let's see. And then one of the things he observed, looking at the Gartner data that I was just showing from Laura McClellan and her colleagues at Gartner, they just came out with a new study. Okay, so how is that money being spent? If the CMO has all this spend, all this tech spend, how is that actually being allocated? So Scott did some follow-up work talking to the Gartner people and said, okay, people, kind of breaks in thirds, and then the technology itself, yes. And then about a third is actual advertising, paid media advertising, or pay-per-click advertising like with search. So he says, aha, we've hit that moment. MarTech, 33% of the CMO's budget. Advertising, which falls under the CMO, 32%. So as of this moment, MarTech has surpassed paid media advertising. And then this is the thing that there's a little bit of, those numbers aren't right, you make different assumptions, but almost who cares? It's in the discussion flow, so it's important. And if we're off by a few percent, it's very significant. Marketing technology is here to stay, it's earning its keep, and it's changing the way we do advertising and marketing. So advertising, MarTech has been eating the CIO's budget, and now it's eating the advertising budget. Kind of a takeaway from this line of analysis. So there's Laura. Traditional marketing is about the 4 Ps: price, product, performance, place, and you can do different permutations or extensions to that. But one of the things that she noticed that when Gartner does an annual survey, and this is big companies, not the SMBs, for the last 8 surveys that Gartner has done, they've concluded with talking about CMOs and the 4 Ps, that the results are kind of astonishing. So what's astonishing to a smart company like Gartner talking to the smartest CMOs in the world at these big companies? What's sort of interesting is customer experience. We love customer experience. That's rule 1. So they found that, yes, the CMO, what's your most important priority for the next year? Customer experience ranks first. So this last survey, it ranked 5th. So it's like, what the heck's going on? We don't care about our customers anymore? And so her conclusion from this is that, yeah, we're still about the 4 Ps, or however you want to characterize that, but the customer experience is no longer this abstract thing. We love customers, and we love to enrich the customer experience. It's like, how do you actually do experience has gone from this abstract thing that ranks first or foremost in the minds of COOs, just like it's execution. So the first four things are really executions about enriching that and embracing that and extending that customer experience. So it's kind of cool the way that their survey series has evolved. Again, this is big companies. Mostly what I'm going to be talking about for the last part of my presentation is the small companies. What we see happen in big companies oftentimes percolates down. So the small companies now have a lot of the tech that big companies had exclusively to themselves 5 or 10 years ago, and that time frame accelerates. What bubbles down from the top companies, it becomes cost effective and user-friendly enough for smaller or less experienced people that don't have a staff to do all this stuff to embrace. So marketing as a strategy has a goal of helping companies re-engineer the customer experience, and that's actually happening in tech to execute on strategy. This book I talked about, Beyond Advertising, kind of cool. There's been this whole program at Wharton. Catherine Hayes and Jerry Hill are the people that co-direct this. They work with big brands. What are you guys doing? What are you seeing? How is your company changing? And so it's sort of interesting that it really is morphing from advertising like the old bullet theory of communications. We're going to have reach and frequency. We're going to hit you with a bunch of impressions until you submit to our will and buy our breakfast cereal. Obviously, those days are gone. It gets much more complicated than that. The previous session talking about content marketing. I want to tell a story. I want to tell a narrative. I want to make, what was the example? Toe fungus medicine or whatever it was. I mean, it's like, yeah, I mean, people, there's a story about that. Let's tell the story. But the main thing is that the technology has really leveled the playing field between startups and established companies. So in the world, we are fighting to be heard above the noise and get brand equity and get some engagement with your brand and the clients. How can I do that? There's MarTech out there that's free for 24 million SMBs. As they start to execute in that MarTech in smarter ways, you know, some will be dumb and add to the noise, but some will be really smart and start to move the needle with their customers. And as they start to do that, there's 24 million of these businesses. They start to do that, whether or not they're connected to a national brand, it's going to kind of reset expectations and behaviors, and therefore strategies and responses to what goes on in the whole advertising and marketing business. I guess that was sort of an advertisement, but we are, let's see. Okay, yeah, so leveling the playing field, not just for big companies, the strategic role of marketing, as I was saying, connect the brand to the customer, tech platforms, data science, and mediated customer touch points. Follow the customer through the funnel, through the journey, through the pretzel, through whatever you want to call it. And that's kind of where we focus. The data science, if you look at a bunch of campaigns, which a lot of times you see much higher lift in whatever the KPIs are, either brand goals, awareness and favorability, or engagement goals, floor traffic, downloading maps, tracked phone calls, things like that. Okay, I'm going to switch now and spend my last few minutes here just sharing some of our survey data when we interview these, either they're small and medium business owners or they're one of the key people that makes the decisions about how they spend our advertising and marketing dollars. So data is where it starts. If you don't have data, it doesn't matter how much you spend on your MarTech platform, nothing's going to happen. So do these small and medium businesses have CRMs? Top bar, over half don't even have a CRM, and no might have one in the next 12 months. So 3/4 of SMBs, these 24 million businesses, don't have a CRM and aren't really even sure if they're going to have one even in the next year. So that's going to tip at some point. This is a community, and one of their competitors gets a CRM system and says, oh my gosh, you know, I'm kicking your ass. It's like, well, how are you doing that? Well, I've got this new thing. Well, how much do you pay for it? It's free. So it's going to be fun to watch this tip as this marketing technology stuff gets more kind of in the culture of these SMBs. 75% of them aren't using even customer relationship data systems now. Once they do that, it's going to tip very fast and be kind of fun to watch. Customer lists. Do you know who your customers are? They come to your store. Sometimes you know them by name. Sometimes you don't. Do you track that systematically? 75%, so over 3/4, 78% say, yeah, I mean, I know who my customers are. I have some kind of a list. So they don't have CRM systems. You say it's free, let's start using it. What do I do with it? They're pretty well equipped to input that data somehow and start to use it from a MarTech perspective. And we've seen MarTech work in a lot of different perspectives. So, I mean, ingredient one is, are you using a CRM system? No. So it's sort of a muted response now in that community, the SMB community. Do you have, sorry to use weaponry imagery, but do you have the ammunition to fuel a MarTech platform? Yeah, I mean, they've got some level of information, but how good are they at that? So one thing is loyalty programs. Do they have loyalty programs, quarter due? The rest of them don't, may or may not have one. Over half say, no, I don't want to do a loyalty program. All I'm doing is lowering my margin. I'm getting the same people in, they're paying me less, so it's not a good deal. Other businesses love loyalty programs. So loyalty programs, a lot of SMBs like to do that for recruitment, to get new customers. A lot of times the experience is, it's like Bed Bath & Beyond. Who believes they're actually getting 20% off from Bed Bath & Beyond? It's like, okay, that's sort of the classic case of these things really work. So you have a customer loyalty program, that's an input. They redeem something, so you have some sense of engagement. That's data. I have engagement with my customer. So if you're a small and medium business, do you actually do that? Absolutely. 60% track it on paper. I got those coupons, so I know it works. Somebody comes in with a money mailer or a Valpak, I knew it. But there's a lot of kind of opportunity here to digitize this, make it more efficient and more impactful. About a third operate themselves using some sort of digital tracking. Who knows what that is? Credit card companies, there are programs now, American Express small medium business program will give reports out. Point of sale systems like Square and those kind of things will get some report out. So it's kind of changed, but there's kind of prehistory here for this big momentum shift with small and medium businesses. How do you track the lead sources? The John Wanamaker thing, I mean, how'd you get here? How'd you find out about this? So ask, Rick, how did you get here today? Steve Smith invited me, so I came. Okay, so we're gonna re-optimize our advertising program and give a ton of money to Steve, because that works so well. Emails, clicks, track calls, promotions, direct mail, that's kind of how they do it. But basically it's, hey, how'd you find out about this? This is a horrible chart, but basically the point here is, do we even care what you think about us? And so that's one of the things we track in our survey. Do you care what opinions customers share about you on different platforms? So over on the left is Facebook. The dark blue means not at all important, and the green means extremely important. So Facebook, which 75% of SMBs have a Facebook page, and 75% of SMBs do something with Facebook, produce some sort of content, whether it's paid for content like sponsored news feeds or pay somebody to update the content. Really important, and they get some attribution of ROI there. So it's like, do we even care what customers say about us? You know, it's sort of scary how it's not that important when you can get access to this with social listening tools to figure out do customers like you or not, do they like the competition. Do you track your comments, customer comments about your business at all? Again, this is all data that helps me understand my customer better. Somebody complains about me, it's like, I want to know about that. Somebody compliments a competitor, I want to know about that. That helps me be smarter in my business. Do you monitor customer comments? Half, almost 60% say yes. So again, it's sort of uneven behaviors here and attitudes with these businesses. They do some things kind of right that sets them up well to leverage marketing technology platforms, but they fall down in some other obvious areas. So as I start to put this together, and those companies that are associated with national brands get a lot of training, and they have groups that they go to learn more about digital marketing. I gave a presentation recently to 2 different small and medium business groups. And I said, how many of you guys, men and women in the room, how many of you do paid search advertising? It's like, how many of you have used a Google Analytics dashboard? Like everybody. And then I threw up some other marketing jargon and digital marketing kind of concepts. They're like, what? It's like, have you ever heard of the phrase marketing technology? How many of you use a customer relationship management system? It's like nothing. So they're really well schooled. Google's really well schooled them, and the PSPs that work with Google in analytics, dashboards, optimization, targeting. So they've had the training. All they need to understand is they can generalize that same training to all these other marketing technology platforms, and they're kind of pre-positioned with the data and some of their behaviors to really execute on it. So again, it kind of points to me that there's going to be a massive shift sometime in the next couple of years in this segment, just kind of reset a lot of what's going on in advertising and marketing. How do I monitor my customer comments? Right now, The favorite price for a small and medium business is free, the purple, so 2/3, I monitor it. It's free for me to say, how'd you get in here today? They love free, and I can keep looking at that, and there are free services that will attract them, give them CRMs and other kind of capabilities. Again, a ton of information in this chart. You can't really read it, but basically, marketing technology, it's like when I asked these two groups of small and medium businesses, do you use marketing technology? What does that mean? They don't know. So I gave some examples of different things. Do you use all these different kinds of marketing technology platforms? Basically, the answer is no. What would it take to get you to use them? And what they love is, I'll get to in the next slide, but basically they're not even considering some of this technology yet. They don't really know about it. They're totally schooled on pay-per-click search. They don't really understand there's a whole lot more to that universe of digital marketing than search at the moment. Do they use cloud-based services? Not really. Do they know what a cloud-based service is? Some do, like point-of-sale systems and some loyalty programs are cloud-based. So they sort of know that. Do they collect their data from point-of-sales? Quarter, I don't know. So I read the cash register and give a receipt. I don't know if we capture customer data or not. Kind of interesting. Do you track how effective your advertising and marketing is? Do you do you use customer point-of-sale data to plan your marketing or operational inventory management, things like that? Kind of mixed. Let's see. Okay, I'm coming up to the end here. For new technology, what do you want to get? Basically, the answer is for MarTech, and if you don't use the jargon, but explain to them some of the capabilities that they don't have, that's kind of interesting. So what would it take you to adopt some of these technologies and change behavior so that you can become more effective at marketing your business and have a nicer customer experience end to end and drive more revenue? Got to be reliable, got to be easy to use, it's got to be cost effective, it has to work with other junk, it has to integrate well, it has to be powerful, whatever that means. And it has to be comparable to what my competitors use. I don't want the person across the street to do a better job of something than I'm doing. It has to be the newest and shiniest kind of thing. Those are the kind of questions we put to it. What it all shakes out to is, bottom line, if you can give me something that's reliable, easy, and cheap, I might use it. And so there's a bunch of companies that have come up with that value proposition. It's free, less scheduling, things like that. So a few takeaways here. The MarTech, the marketing technology landscape, it's complicated. That one chart with 4,000 companies in it that sort into different ways. One of the things that other conferences like this one that focus on this space have had contests, the Stacky Awards. What is your marketing stack? And they have CMOs come up there and say, here's our marketing stack. You know, we have 30 different vendors and here's what we do with them. There's no one stack that works. It's mix and match, but it's complicated, but it's really moving towards affordable, interoperable platform stack solutions. The tech is driven totally by the strategy, and that's why the tech budget's moving from CIOs to CMOs. CMOs have the marketing strategy, CIOs don't. SMBs are a big part of the advertising economy, and there's some plate tectonics going on there, shifting things that are going to be very impactful in the marketplace coming up in the next couple of years as they start to figure this out, and the vendors start to figure out how to work with them better. The notion of beyond advertising, it's not just reach and frequency and impressions and gross rating points and things like that. Brands are really looking at how to have whatever that customer experience is. It goes from first place to fifth place. To me, that's a good sign because brands and CMOs are starting to figure out what that customer experience is. They're starting to executing on it, using a strategy layer driven through the tech layer, all fueled by data to enrich the customer experience through the top of the funnel to the bottom of the funnel, or pretzel, or customer journey, whatever you want to call it. Then the beyond advertising, as big brands have already started to do, SMBs are going to have more power available to them, more data, more analytics. They're going to get smarter about how to use this stuff. Insights, platforms that create these things, test, optimize, target, retarget, things like that, all designed to make their customers happier. So when they show up at the store, how'd you find out about us? It's like, well, you know, everywhere I go, I hear about you and how great you are. So I decided to come in and try it out. It's like, yes, I knew my marketing program had worked. And really the final takeaway is some cool stuff's going to happen here. There are some ingredients that are kind of in place in terms of strategy, in terms of knowledge, attitudes, behaviors, the tech, the price points, where things are evolving. It's sort of a confused mess now with 4,000 companies. There'll be exits, there'll be failures, there'll be M&A, but eventually we'll have kind of a coherent set of options that make a lot of sense for different parts of the business sector big companies, mid-sized companies, any small and medium businesses. So that was my goal today, was to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the S&B part of the economy and what to expect next. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rick. Anybody, any questions for Rick? This will be, and I know Rick, one of the things he's great at is covering a huge amount of data very quickly. And if you had trouble catching up and keeping up, again, this is all streamed online. You can grab the video probably by tomorrow morning if you go and tap on Rick's presentation on the agenda back at the site, and you'll see the presentation and you'll hear his presentation there. Rick, as always, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys.
Let me invite Wendy and Leah. I'm in her newsletter, including breaking stories, a wonderful piece of enterprise journalism that she did just a few weeks ago involving the FTC's suit with Amazon, in which she revealed some redacted material that was in some of the rulings that had been redacted, and she revealed some of the stuff that had been redacted, and we filed suit to have more of it revealed. And it told us a great deal about the ways in which Amazon was using data to target parents and the ways in which they were selling apps to users. It's a great object lesson in the cautionary tale, in the ways in which companies are using and misusing data, and the ways in which the FTC is looking much more closely now at how all of this is happening. It's something that hasn't come up enough today, and I'm glad that we're ending on this note of exploring where we are in terms of privacy and policy. And I'm going to let Wendy and Leah introduce themselves, but Leah is the president and CEO of the Network Advertising Initiative, one of the maybe the longest-lived industry group regarding privacy. You've been here as long as I have, but you'll tell us more about that. Please welcome our own Wendy Davis and Leah.
So, thank you, Steve. So I'm here with Lee Freund, President and CEO of the NAI. Before joining the NAI, Lee was Vice President and Chief Counsel for Global Public Policy at AOL. The NAI was formed around 15 years ago. And when it was formed, the industry was really facing its first threat of regulation. Part of the reason for the NAI was to convince the FTC and lawmakers in Congress that the online ad industry could self-regulate. So at the time, the code that the industry came up with has been revised a few times, but is still kind of basically the code that's used now, really makes a distinction between personally identifiable information and non-personally identifiable information. And back in 2000, the thought was personally identifiable information, something that was someone's name, their address, their phone number, a way for a marketer to directly contact that person by name or other clear way of contacting them, was personally identifiable, and that type of information couldn't really be used or combined with other information without people's specific opt-in consent. Non-personally identifiable information was considered anonymous, and tracking cookies were considered anonymous and non-personally identifiable. They identified a computer, but it was a time when computers were shared within a family or by different people at work. And that was all considered non-personally identifiable, and the industry code said that opt-out consent was all that would be required. Those definitions, though, in recent years seem to be evolving. There was a court decision a few weeks ago out of the First Circuit Court of Appeals in Massachusetts saying that an Android device identifier, just a string of random numbers, but that was unchanging with the device, was personally identifiable information, at least when combined with other information, including GPS data. And then the FTC's Jessica Rich, who's the head of consumer protection, did a blog post a few weeks ago, also kind of raising this. And she said in her blog post, we regard data as personally identifiable and thus warranting privacy protections when it can be reasonably linked to a person, computer, or device. And goes on to list examples of persistent identifiers, such as device identifiers, MAC addresses, static IP addresses, or cookies meet this test. So that's really a big, if she means that, if the FTC means that, that seems like a very big shift in thinking about this issue. So let me ask Lee, what do your members think about that? The same.
Wow, that's a good opening question. Yeah, so I think just a little bit of, to start, I've been with NAI just over a year, and boy, has time flown, and things have changed even in that year. So, NAI is really evolved and grown over the years to incorporate, when we were formed back in 2000, it was all third-party ad networks, and that was the only type of company that kind of, hence our name, Network Advertising Initiative, which, query to one of my board members sitting in the back row whether or not we need to change that, but we'll talk about that later. But we've really encompassed a lot more of the pipes that connect the advertisers and the publishers and the and the consumers. So as we evolve and take on new members, mobile members, and location companies, et cetera, we really do have to think through those definitions and the definition of PII, non-PII, how our code is evolving. And as Wendy mentioned, our code has evolved, has been updated and amended a few times. I think one of the big initiatives for 2016, and then I'll get to your specific question, but for 2016 is to think through, and this is a comment that we heard from Jessica, as well as Manisha Mithal, who works for Jessica at the DAA Summit last week, which is how do we consolidate and modernize our code in a way that makes it much more comprehensive. And so at the moment, both the DAA principles and the NAI code have a mobile code and a web-based code. So one of the things we're doing this year is taking a look at how do we merge those. And I think as a condition precedent to that activity comes the concept of thinking through what you just suggested, Wendy, which is, are the definitions of PII and non-PII merging? The specific comment that Jessica made at the NAI Summit that talked about personal information was IP addresses, and then she kind of expanded on that slightly in her blog. I think the question for us is what's reasonably linkable to a person or a device, and the FTC has laid out, a three-part test to determine what's reasonably linkable, and the concept of de-identification comes up in that three-part test, and then the contractual representations and the public commitments not to merge or re-identify data. So it's hard to think about de-identifying an IP address if you can't really identify an IP address with a person in the first place. But I do think that kind of the concept of thinking through a couple of things, the concept of thinking through whether or not that information actually is reasonably linkable to a person or a device is something we're thinking about when we think about modernizing our definitions. And also the concept of what's in our individual company or not companies are actually doing what they're saying, which is a comment that we've heard from the FTC many times, which is be transparent, which most of our companies are committed to doing, all of our companies are committed to doing, and to do what we say. And so are the disclosures in your privacy policy sufficient to give consumers fair notice about what type of data is being collected?
Well, I mean, is the NAI considering they're changing the standard for what type of consent is needed to collect? If there is a decision that cookies can be personally identifiable information, right now then under the code they would require consumers to explicitly consent before the information is used for ad targeting. Is there thought that it's the consent part of the code that might change as opposed to the definitional code part?
Should we get a decision that says cookies are PII and require opt-in consent, then obviously we'd have a lot of thinking to do about a lot of different things. At the moment, I think, we are firm believers, and this might come up in a different context, but that the opt-out consent system that we established way back in 2000, that the DAA has adopted as the whole cross-industry, is the appropriate standard that balances, innovation and creativity and a free internet with consumer transparency, choice, and control. So I think that's where we'd like to stay, and we'll see what court decisions.
Why is that, though? I mean, what have your members found, if any have attempted to get opt-in consent, that makes the industry say that opt-out consent is the right standard?
Well, I think that there are certain types of data that is collected for individuals that does require opt-in consent, and that's precisely what our code already says. So if you are gathering information that is personally identifiable, or if you're gathering information about sensitive health conditions, for example, we are going to ask those companies that collect that information to get opt-in consent from users. So I think that's where we should focus on the harm that is created by the data collection, and then require the standard to be heightened when that harm is potential is greater.
But for, say, non-sensitive information, is the fear just that consumers would not consent, and that's why you want to stay with the opt-out standard?
I think that consumers understand both the value exchange and what they're opting into. When we try to make very clear the disclosures for opting out and make clear what you're opting out of. So I think, yeah, there's a number of different factors that would weigh into that. But at the same time, you think through a privacy policy that's 18 pages long, and you're required to, how many folks read the terms and conditions when you download an app? Nobody's raising their hand. So if you require a click to consent to those terms and conditions, you're clicking through it because you want to get to that content. And so is that a clear exercise of choice? Whereas a consumer that goes in to our page or the DAA page and says, I don't want to have ads tracking me or information collected about me, and so therefore I am going to decidedly opt out, then maybe that's a clear example of exercise of consumer choice.
Now, the FCC has recently proposed that internet service providers, Time Warner, Comcast, the cable companies, or telecoms that actually connect people to the internet, should not be able to use any data about the websites that their customers visit for ad targeting purposes without opt-in consent from the consumers. And the FCC says an ISP is different from a site like Google or a company like DoubleClick, that an ISP knows every site people go to. They might not be able to see everything that's encrypted, but they can see a lot, and they can infer a lot of information from patterns of web use, including the time of day that people access the web. And the consumers don't have the same kinds of choices about what ISP to use as they do about what websites to visit. And consumers also, they can clear their cookies. There are things they can do besides using the industry-approved opt-out to opt out of targeting by DoubleClicks or Googles, that they don't have the same options with ISPs. The only thing really comparable to deleting a cookie with an ISP is connecting to the web through a VPN, and that is something that most people just aren't going to do right now when they're expensive and hard to set up. What do your members think of this proposal?
So, yeah, I mean, we have talked about it quite a bit. There was a Senate hearing, I don't know if anyone is aware of it, last week, where the Senate Judiciary Committee actually asked the FTC and the FCC to come testify and give them information about why this proposal is necessary, and what does the FCC hope to accomplish with this rulemaking, and what does the FTC think about it? And it's interesting, and we talk about it as not only just NAI members, but together with the cross-industry organizations that are also concerned about it. Now, I will tell you that there's only one company in my membership of currently 103 that's directly affected by this regulation, right? Since my companies are those pipes that connect the ads or that serve the ads, and not necessarily the internet service providers, but we are worried about the downstream effects on the advertising industry, digital advertising industry generally, on a very restrictive opt-in consent environment. So I actually wrote down, if you're interested, the industry put together a letter that we sent to the senators before this hearing, and we raised a few points in them, and by the industry I mean the American Association or the American Advertising Federation, the 4As, the ANA, the the DMA, the Electronic Retail Association, the IAB, the NRF, NAI, and the Chamber of Commerce. So we all got together and made the following points, which is, one, the existing self-regulation, and I wrote them down so I would remember. Sorry. The existing self-regulation supported by FTC enforcement is the appropriate tool for this industry. And I won't go into too many details. If people want to talk after, I'm happy to talk about it. Two, the effective legal safeguards that are already in existence via FTC enforcement and states' attorneys general are perfectly appropriate and already effective, and we don't need additional regulation in this area. Three, the FCC lacks congressional authority to issue regulation in this area, which is an interesting piece that would probably be another 2 hours all by itself. Four, consumers and individuals benefit from a single agency leading on privacy enforcement, and that agency has already spoken. They have the FTC with their Section 5 authority in ads. Number five, the NPRM, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, is out of step with the existing privacy framework and would undermine the ad-supported internet, which is primarily the point that the NAI is concerned with. No record of harm to justify, the rulemaking, and that Congress should set a universal national breach notification standard and implement it, and that would be something because folks are really worried about the notification processes for breach.
So going back to number 5 on your list, why does this
Figure out
rule
what number 5 is.
that it would undermine the current system?
Yeah.
Why is that? Because under the current system now, any ISPs, the only ISP that is currently actually targeting people based on their web activity, as far as I know, is AT&T. And they're doing that in areas where they have rolled out the gigabit fiber service, and they're asking for people's opt-in consent and giving them a discount on their service for agreeing to consent to this. And I think one of the reasons why the other ISPs have not done this is I think they've assumed for a long time that it at least raises questions of whether they're allowed to do this. So, I mean, it seems that in some ways this rulemaking would preserve the status quo. Why do you say it would undermine the system?
So I think another factor to kind of the opt-in versus opt-out debate that we've been having is that if consumers do opt in, they will opt in, as we've said, they're not going to read the fine print, and they will opt in, and it will open up an environment where companies can gather even more personal information about you and know everything about you, whereas right now, many companies only care about your behavior in order to serve, for instance, I'll use me as an example, a Nordstrom shoe ad because they happen to know I like shoes, even though I wore flats today and it might not be reflected in my actual outfit. Anyway, and so if the opt-in environment continues, that might be less privacy friendly because consumers aren't necessarily aware that they're opting in to the collection of so much personal information. So again, we think that the right standard is to think about opt-in for the really sensitive stuff that matters, to prohibit legislatively or otherwise some of the really sensitive stuff like information for financial purposes, health, and discrimination and things like that.
Well, I think the FTC has said in the past that even when companies get opt-in consent, it can still be unfair to collect too much information. I mean, there was a case they brought against Sears where Sears was working with a panelist who had been paid, I don't know, $10 or $10 a month or something for all of their data. And the FTC brought in, said that was unfair because even though all of the people on the panel had opted in and were getting paid for it, they didn't understand, it wasn't made clear enough to them that all of their data was going to be collected. So, I mean, I'm not sure that it's just because something is opt-in, that means that any data at all would be
I think it's a slippery slope. That's the thing we're concerned about. I think it is something that, again, one of the things we're focused on from a privacy perspective is committing to transparency and providing, the information that consumers need. So, we would argue that even in an opt-in world, we'd make sure that our companies were transparent. But I think, it is a slippery slope down, and I am as much as possible. So that's where we stand.
So, the Commerce Department just put out a study collected as a result of a survey that found that a large proportion of people, I think it was almost half of households with at least one web user, had limited their use of the web because of concerns that they were losing control over their personal data. And in some cases, the fear was mainly identity theft or some other type of fraud. But to me, I found it surprising how many people said that they had cut back on their use of social networks, they had cut back on posting opinions online, and one of the main concerns was collection of data about them by companies. Right now, none of the self-regulatory codes address data collection. It's all about data use, and saying that even if data is collected, it can't be used for targeted advertising. Have your members discussed at all rethinking that to come up with some way to give people more control over the type of data that gets collected about them?
Yeah, it's always something that we're discussing, and when we talk about modernization of the code, I think that's part of it. I will say, since you mentioned a survey, you gave me a perfect in, that the DAA recently commissioned a survey, and that survey actually said that 85%, and again, we can all discuss surveys all day long that say whatever we want, but that 85% of users found customized ads actually useful for them. 80% of those users, they also put a rather high value on the internet services that they actually used on a given daily, weekly, monthly basis, as high as, I think the average was about $100 per month. If you put my weather app and my, and all the other social media and all the other things, if you were going to put a value on that, the package would be $100 a month. Now, query whether or not somebody would actually pay that if forced to, but that gives you a sense of the value that the ad-supported internet brings to people, and 80% of the respondents said that if they did have to pay for internet services, they would dial back their use of the internet substantially because they had to pay for it. So that's it's a little bit of a different data point, but I think, it has been really interesting to see how the internet and apps and all of this has evolved just in, when I was a young lawyer starting out, I didn't even have a computer at my desk, so now I'll totally date myself. You guys can figure out how long ago that was, 5 years, so I think, as the industry continues to evolve, one of the things that we always pride ourselves on as a self-regulatory organization versus being subject to congressional legislation or FCC or FTC regulation is that we can think about these evolving issues. One of the things we're really focused on right now is cross-device tracking and targeting and customized ads, and we're also thinking about addressable TV, Internet of Things, and those bring their own data and privacy challenges, right? So how do you provide notice and consent on a toaster that doesn't have a screen? So we're thinking through all of those things and how, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
And how all of those things, how our code can be applied to all of those things as our companies think about expanding their technologies.
But let me ask you, since you did bring up cross-device tracking, that's something else that Jessica Rich mentioned in her blog post. She said that there needs to be a way for people to opt out of all tracking. Not, as it is now, it's kind of clunky. People can opt out kind of device by device, but that the industry has to simplify that. Is that something that's realistic?
I think, here's the thing, cross-device, the ability to develop a cross-device product has been around for, I don't know, I'm looking at Alan, 3 years? 2 years, and it will continue to evolve. So I think, when you look at something from a public policy standpoint or a self-regulatory standpoint, what you try to do is you start with what most companies can commit to, because that's a way to start. And I think, we applauded the DAA's guidance, which is a single device opt-out. We're working on our own guidance, and we've said that that is an important first step. And so the first step is to remove one device, whether we get to an entire device graph that you can see and you can opt out of all your devices at the same time, or only those devices you want to be excluded. Maybe we'll get there. I just don't know. The technology has evolved so fast in that area, and I think it will continue to evolve, and our guidance will have to continue to evolve around it.
So what are your plans in terms of revising the code? What are your immediate plans?
So our immediate plan is, as I said before, to think about consolidating the mobile app code and the regular code, and so that when consumers look to our code and member companies and potential members look to our code, they can just see one comprehensive code of conduct that will cover interest-based advertising.
Is that going to have any substantive changes, or are you really
It may.
thinking-
Or,
what are you
one of the
thinking
things
of?
we're thinking of is, so if when we issue our cross-device guidance, that will also be incorporated. And as I said, again, the other things that are high on our priority that we have working groups established and are looking to do is issue cross-device guidance, think more about our location data and how that evolves, and addressable TV, Internet of Things. I think those things are things that are really, whether or not it's this year or next year, they're high on our priority list for ways to continue to provide value to our companies and also think about new members who might want to be committed to the privacy regime we've already established.
Are there any questions from the audience? If not, I have some more.
Please, you guys, ask me questions. No. I'm teasing.
Okay, so let me go back to the FCC proposal. Are your members, is there a conflict within your membership over this proposal? Because it seems to me that if you have a company like AOL, which is owned by an ISP, that company's interests would be very different from the interests of some of the older players or the more established, the former ad networks who don't have access to at least the same kind of information as the ISPs do.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I can't speak for AOL anymore since I haven't been there in a year, and I left before the I haven't heard most folks feel that the did a really great job and has been the most active enforcers of privacy, in the world. And so I think we feel like we're happy with them, and we should continue to work with them.
But isn't that going to happen no matter what? I mean, if the net neutrality rules are upheld, then the FTC doesn't have jurisdiction over common carriers. So no matter what, the FCC is going to have its own privacy rules. I mean,
Right, and so then we've got to determine what those are, and I think, where the FCC, where Chairman Wheeler said last week, where the FCC is they've issued a notice, and they're trying to gather information and substantive comments, which we are contributing to, and the rest of the industry, and, we'll see where we end up. I think everybody is waiting with bated breath on whether or not that decision, every minute they say it should come out now.
Right,
no, it should come out
Tuesday
now.
and Friday, right?
Right, exactly. So, so we'll wait and see.
Alan Chappelle and Lee, I think it's fair to say that the NAI has historically been focused on advertising technology companies. Well, this is a MarTech conference, that's the title of it. And so how do you see the NAI as the marketplace evolves from ad tech to MarTech, or as those two concepts kind of merge? How do you see the NAI being involved in that marketplace development?
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Alan. I think, as we have already evolved so far beyond kind of the traditional ad network environment, and I think as the industry continues to either consolidate or bring in different things, we have agencies we're now talking to because they do they do things that are privacy related with respect to advertising. I think, and as everything kind of converges, there's going to be an opportunity an opportunity for, MarTech companies, ad tech companies to come together and try to be, committed to privacy. I think, the more you interact with users and the more you interact with data points, the more important it's going to be to align yourself with the self-regulatory program of some sort. And I think, we are perfectly positioned to be that organization. But I also think that, member or not, our code of conduct can inform companies that are interacting with data in terms of setting best practices and being a thought leader in the space in terms of data collection and use.
for as long as I've been covering this space and talking about privacy, there's always been the question of how much consumers themselves really want to be involved in the process. And as we start moving towards an Internet of Things, and we start talking about connected toasters and things like that, we're talking about a set of services that are increasingly intimate, part of everyday life, but and also, and to some degree, more indispensable. So I'm curious. I know that the NAI has always had this sort of an opt-out vehicle online, and I'm curious if there's been any trajectory in the level of interest that consumers show in wanting to manage their data.
Yes, I would say absolutely. And you can see it through either both our consumer hotline or the number of emails and inquiries that we get. I think there's a common misperception that when folks, I think our most common complaint, if you get it from a consumer, is I've opted out and I'm still getting ads. So we as an industry need to do a better job of explaining to consumers that what you're opting out of is customized ads or interest-based ads, and you're still going to get advertising because that's part of the internet ecosystem. So gee, wouldn't you rather get an advertisement for Nike shoes or Nordstrom shoes, or my dad would like to get an advertisement for Nike golf. So I think we, and the DAA has initiated a consumer education campaign just recently. We're redoing our consumer education pages to be clearer and to involve more of the technologies that we're facing. I think as we think through the Internet of Things, there's going to be a better opportunity to communicate with consumers in a way that gets them to understand. I think you can't connect your toaster via an app and have it tell, I don't know, toaster maybe a bad example, but with your refrigerator to know, how much smart water you have without thinking that, gosh, maybe the smart water might want to advertise to me, as I'm reordering it in my refrigerator, or smart water's competitor. So I think there's an opportunity there. Again,
if you opt out, if you use that simple check to opt out of everything, suddenly you're turning off a whole set of services that you actually have come to value because things actually operate in your house because of it.
Right, and so I think
it changes the equation.
Yeah, it does
data.
change the equation, and I think that's where the opportunity lies to educate consumers about what that value proposition is. And so that would be something, I think the Internet of Things provides that great opportunity. And, is there a way we can communicate with consumers about what the choices that they have are without a screen? Is there a seal? Is there something that we can put on the boxes? Is there something we can put on the side of the toaster that shows them, okay, this is connected, but I've got choices, and this is what I need to do it? All thinking just from my thought.
For all we know, another opportunity for machine intelligence to start understanding.
Fair, yeah.
To take small cues from people about how they value and what levels of privacy they're comfortable with, and start extrapolating from there.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
so we're excited about the future. It's always changing and evolving. It's never a boring job. I said it at AOL, I'll say it with this one too.
Wendy, Lee, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time.
And again, everyone, of any sessions that you may have missed or you want to review more carefully,